Welcome to the Leadership, Strategy, and AI podcast with your host, Nadia Gill. In every episode, we are on a journey to explore these dynamic topics with inspiring leaders who are making a difference. Welcome to the Leadership, Strategy, and AI podcast. I'm your host, Nadia Gill. In today's episode, we have Jyoti Guptara as our guest to talk about why storytelling matters in business culture and leadership and how AI is changing it. Jyoti Guptara is a business storytelling expert and best-selling author of fiction and nonfiction. A global speaker and advisor on narrative strategy, Jyoti has helped leaders all over the world use storytelling for more success in both presentations and day-to-day leadership. Jyoti believes that telling stories is the quickest, cheapest, and deepest way to influence. He helps organizations reap the benefits in executive education and leadership development. His book, Business Storytelling From Hyped to Hack, Unlock the Software of the Mind, was praised by the president of IMD Business School and the CEO of Walmart. Find out more at www.guptara.com. That's www.g-u, P as in Peter, T as in Thomas, A-R-A.com. And now, here is Jyoti with why storytelling matters in business and how AI is changing it. Hi, Jyoti. How are you?
Hi, Nadia. I'm happy to see you again. How are you?
I'm so happy, and I know it took us a while to get this coordinated with your very busy schedule as a storyteller, business coach, and author of multiple books. So I am so happy to have you today in the
Such a pleasure
studio.
to be with you, Nadia.
Where are you right now?
I'm in Switzerland.
Wow.
Just got back from South Korea, and next week it's on to Vienna.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. Okay, so let's get to this. We have a full agenda. Let's tell me about you. Tell me about your career, any decisions that brought you to where you are right now.
I love that question, Nadia, because decisions bring us right to the topic that is close to my heart of storytelling. Because the most interesting moments in a story are when we take decisions, and often there's a crisis or a dilemma. And I've certainly gone through a few of them to arrive at what I do now, which is training leadership teams or sales teams to improve their performance by adopting a narrative approach to leadership or to sales. That's business storytelling, right? So
Yep.
I do that as a corporate trainer. I've published several books, which is what gets me invited to give talks and things like that. But actually, my publishing and speaking journey started when I was a teenager, and I dropped out of school at the age of 15 to pursue a passion for fiction. So I became a novelist.
Wow.
Some people tell me I was the youngest full-time and ultimately published novelist in the world. Be that as it may, I published my first book when I was 17 years old, and that led to giving hundreds of talks and workshops. And that's
Wow.
when I noticed that I could either put audiences to sleep by speaking conceptually, or I could help them to pay attention with hooks and by being very concrete and painting pictures and using emotions. And those were all techniques that came in handy in 2015 when I was a fellow at a United Nations partner organization. We had fantastic people, CEOs on sabbatical, generals and spies and diplomats.
Oh
These were people
boy.
with incredible experience and expertise, and yet sometimes you couldn't tell why were they so passionate about their topic when they were on the stage. It would put you to sleep with the typical UN speak or business speak, which is very abstract and is sometimes hard to connect to or hard to inspire. And then you would have dinner or coffee with these same people, and they were fascinating. Why? Well, Nadia, you and I know that's because that's when they told stories. So these were a few of the highlights on my journey. I was a full-time writer for 10 years. And for the last
Wow.
10 years, I've been applying the skills that I learned as a novelist and as a speaker to help executives and managers use storytelling in their daily operations.
Wow. I have so many follow-up questions to that. First, what did your mom think of that?
That's so true. It was my father who suggested that I drop out of school because I would
Oh,
always
whoa.
complain. I would come home from school from the age of 5 and complain to my parents that surely I have better things to do with my time. And so 10 years later, my good Indian father, who himself was a university professor by background, he came up with the smart idea that maybe Junior needs a dose of reality and let him do as he wants. And he did, which is very unusual, especially for an Indian father. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Any father, any dad.
So
Oh,
the first 2 years, between the ages of 15 and 17, I was just an unemployed, gamer because it 2 years for my first book to be published. And in that time, my mother
wow.
did insist that I do some kind of distance learning certificate. But I couldn't get a job with that, even if I tried, which is what happened 10 years later when income dried up from my book royalties because there
Hmm.
were huge shifts in publishing. And that's when I grudgingly at first got into things like copywriting, right? Sales
Yep.
pages, websites, etc., and then marketing and branding. And that's where I started to see more
Wow.
and more that I could bring my passion for telling and hearing stories to the business environment.
This is a great story of how to monetize your passion. And a lot of people speak about, well, my passion is X and I cannot monetize it. Well, you did it, and that's a big achievement because we're talking about fiction writing. It's not as if you were writing economy books. So that's a good segue. You have been doing this for over a decade. Tell me how you see the evolution of your job and the industry. And now with artificial intelligence, the LLMs are so advanced that you give them a few prompts and they give you a very coherent and persuasive story that they can use for a speech. So how is that affecting your business as well? So tell me again the evolution and how that affects your business.
Yeah, LLMs are getting better. They are already scarily good, and I am a little concerned about what they might be doing in 2 or 3 years' time, certainly. Um, as for now, however, I believe that AI is a great way of upskilling for storytelling or any other skill. And that's why I'm not so concerned for my own role right now, because upskilling is one part of what I do. The interesting thing about AI, it's a unique knowledge revolution because it isn't just about access to information. If we think about the printing press, the internet, smartphones, it all helped us to access information more cheaply,
Hmm.
quickly, anywhere on earth. But AI or generative AI isn't just about access to the information, it's about interaction with the information. And that's why it's such a good tool. I mean, you and I met via Marshall Goldsmith, the executive coach in
Yes.
Nashville over 3 days. And as you know, Marshall had just launched Marshall Bot, which was this
Yes.
large language model. He had fed his 52 books into Marshall
Wow.
Bot. He'd had hundreds of hours of conversation to refine this model. And yet, you and I know that executive coaches are far from extinct, right? So we don't have C-suite professionals from the Fortune 500 going to Marshall Bot, right? No, they still go to Marshall and to the 100 coaches and to people like you and me for advice. And so that's why I don't feel threatened by AI. I'm very excited about it. I encourage my clients to use it because it saves me the sometimes more repetitious parts of my job. So, I don't see AI writing books or stories anytime soon, at least not autonomously. A
Yes.
novel or any other kind of experience requires countless decisions. And each decision opens up a different pathway, sort of like a corridor where you open one door and there's another corridor with another dozen doors, which are decisions. So you need extreme agility to navigate each of these doors and corridors and the subsequent opportunities that they open up, or the consequences of your strategic choices, your communication choices. And AI is still far, far from doing that. So AI is a great conversation partner. It's a bad author, but it's a good co-author.
Right. And I always joke that AI, whether it is an app on your phone or an LLM on your laptop, it makes you a what I called an enhanced human, meaning it enables you with the information, where the traffic knots are when you are driving, faster access to information in your search database. But at the end of the day, you need the human to make the final decision. So that's a good segue. Tell me why it is important, the storytelling in business. I get it for a speech, because yeah, you gotta engage the audience. Tell me more. What is the impact of your job in companies?
A lot of people are discovering the power of storytelling as individual leaders, but we still find that storytelling is personal and random at most organizations, right? And that doesn't make it scalable
Yep.
or reliable.
Yep.
So I work both with individuals or teams to help train them in the skill of storytelling, which, as you say, is so important for giving talks, but also for things like meetings. But then I
Mm.
also work as an advisor at the organizational level to help people shape culture. So you've
Mm.
got strategy, which is the explicit guide to behavior. Then you've got culture, which is the implicit guide to behavior, and is what people are actually going to do. Now, how do you change culture? Well, culture arises from the stories, the things that people say. How do you get promoted around here? What kind of behavior gets you punished? Things like that, right?
Yep.
Or
Yep.
the organizational values. So we can be very intentional about crafting stories that aren't just good sounding black on white posters, which then people don't really look at anymore.
Yep.
People can't picture those values, or they can't picture the kind of culture you want, or even what it looks like to implement the strategy. So I help people to align these mission critical components of organizational communication, which is why I talk about mission critical storytelling as opposed to merely business storytelling, which is individuals learning to be more inspiring leaders and create clarity around complex narratives, or even technical details if they come from the operational side. So I do a lot of work with cross-functional teams as well to help them understand each other, or
Wow.
in client-facing situations, or whoever the stakeholders may be.
This is great, because prior to meeting you, I thought of business storytelling as Steve Jobs unveiling the latest iPhone, or Sundar Pichai in every quarterly meeting where he's a very engaging, fantastic storyteller. So that's a good segue. Tell me about the trends, things that you saw 10 years ago that were in and now are out, or now in 2025 and beyond. What things you see coming in the pipeline?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think I would start, the first thing that comes to mind, since we were just talking about individual charismatic leaders, I would say personal branding is something that's changed over the last decade. So
Mm.
it's not unusual now for a CEO to have more followers on their LinkedIn page than
Yes.
organization does. And that just shows the power of personal, authentic storytelling, and the fact that people do business with people, and people like to follow people. They're interested in other people. So that's one change. Just over 10 years ago, we had smartphone adoption take off, right? Hard to believe. It's not that long ago. So one very tactical, practical thing that's changed, even in what I do with clients, is I help people to categorize their stories, or even to start storing their stories so that they're accessible at the touch of a button within seconds, so that
Wow.
people can prepare to go into a meeting or give a talk. And it shaves hours off an executive's time if they have
Wow.
a curated collection of stories. Now, the smartphone makes access to these stories super easy because now we have apps that sync across your devices. So you could be at your workplace on your laptop and you read an article, and then you could capture that into your Google Keep or your OneNote or whatever other sort of note taking software you use. And then you're in a taxi going to a meeting and you're listening to a podcast or you're having a phone conversation with somebody and you get inspired to file away another nugget of an
Yep.
experience you or someone else had. And that's a real game changer. With
Wow.
AI, that goes to the next level because now if you're reading a book, you can take a photo of that page with ChatGPT and say,
Wow.
transcribe this. And
Wow.
then what
Yes.
took me 10 or 15 minutes to dictate and to polish or even just to type up, I can now do with just one photo. And so even my personal story collection just this year, Nadia, has probably quadrupled in comparison to the last few years. So
How do you
those are
keep track of all that? This is like having, too many sweaters. How do you even remember all the uh stories that you store?
This is exactly why I recommend that leaders develop their own personal story bank, which is
Mm.
searchable by keyword, because then you don't have to remember. Usually, we remember there was some kind of story that this particular client told us, or that was to
Yep.
do with theme, maybe a biography that you read, but you can't remember what that story was exactly. Now, all it takes is putting in that keyword into your searchable database, and then you'll get half a dozen, related stories, which you can use to make your point far more compellingly than you would merely by making a statement. That's what stories are all about. They're not just an explanation; they give people an experience.
How do you balance brevity, particularly working across different cultures? I have noticed that some cultures prefer just go to the point, give me the bottom line, and then if they have questions, they will ask the questions.
Yeah, it certainly takes cultural sensibility,
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, because people are different as well. I know there are more left brained sort of executives and they want the
Yes.
executive summary, and that's that. And that's why sometimes it takes a little bit of groundwork to establish the benefit of stories and that they are
Mm.
two-way listening devices. And I think by now, given a lot of what's happened, for example, at Credit Suisse, our second largest bank here in Switzerland, which now has, of course, been folded into UBS,
Mhm, mhm.
we can really tell that even at the highest levels, it's so important to have a two-way dialogue. And storytelling, I believe the power isn't just in developing your strategy and then sort of pushing that out or cascading a message to the workforce and the front line. No, it's listening back. What sort of stories are people telling? And that should ideally come all the way back up to the decision makers. So stories should be taken into consideration, not just as a quantitative side
Mhm.
of things, but as the qualitative data. And they really paint a much fuller picture, which helps decision makers make better decisions.
That's true. That's true. We're talking about 2025 and beyond. Who's your ideal client? When should someone call you if a person or an organization are experiencing this kind of problem? What would that problem be that we need to call Jyoti?
Well, a lot of organizations are struggling with low engagement, high turnover, resistance to change, poor performance, because their culture and their strategy are not aligned. So I would say anyone who would like to improve the performance of their workforce, and they suspect that it could be a question of aligning their narratives, getting
Mhm.
buy-in for what their organization is all about. Those are the clients where I provide most value with these particular challenges. So how do you best communicate a strategy? Most of the time, the workforce can't really imagine a particular change or even the strategy. And if
Yes,
something isn't imaginable, it's not actionable. And
that's
we
true.
want people to implement what we're talking about. At the end of the day, I believe that most of what drives an organization forwards is the strategy, that is
Mhm.
decision making, then the communication, so that people understand and embrace, but also the execution. So what I do is I provide the missing links or the bridges between these islands, which are often isolated. You've got the strategy and it's formulated in a certain way, but people don't think strategically about how to communicate the strategy so that it's implemented. So those are some of my favorite projects, Nadia.
What is next for you? Another book and working in big mergers in these upcoming years?
I actually just signed my 8th book deal, which is a
Wow.
thriller. So, I continue to write fiction, but sadly it's more by night and weekends these days. I just completed a really interesting change management program where
Wow.
we rolled out new stories every 3 months. We had these episodes and we created a client's headquarters, which they were still building. It was a 3-year process. But we got to virtualize their premises, which a friend of mine does, who has, I believe, the best VR solution on the market. And with that, you can then create an extra layer and go beyond just a virtual tour of a campus and really gamify and
Wow.
create experiences. In my case, I was working with cross-functional teams because the chemists and then you've got the biologists at a pharmaceutical company. And for people from the outside, you think, well, they're all scientists, aren't they? But no, of course, they have very different workflows, a different vocabulary sometimes, different mindset. Coming out next, I'm going to actually scale my training programs, Nadia,
Wow.
because I've really observed the difference of doing a 2-day or 3-day offsite or 2 or 3 workshops
Mhm.
versus a learning journey. So I'm really doubling down because I want to see, and you want to see transformation for our
Yep.
clients, don't we?
Yeah. How do you manage your time? Because you are writing and you're traveling all over the world and working with organizations and leaders. And on top of that, that you have to keep building your pipeline for your business, your sales, which I'm sure it's also a full-time job. Do you have a team? Do you use freelancers? How do you do all this?
I work with different people, so I do
Mm.
have teams depending on the project that I'm doing. I can't do it all myself, of course. Now,
Yeah.
organizations have a lot of internal resources that we can
Yep.
leverage, but when it comes to my own projects, I have people I like to partner with for filming and editing and things like that, and some other back end work. But I still don't really have a virtual assistant or something like that. I do most of the work myself. I'm very relational, Nadia, and sometimes that's to my detriment, but I think it's my strength as well. So I've found that even using a simple tool like Todoist, which is one of my apps that I regularly use,
Hmm.
has been a game changer when it came to something like email. Earlier, I used to use my inbox as a
Hmm.
to-do list. I would
Hmm.
have 3 different to-do lists, and I really made a big change just in the last several months
Hmm.
by forcing myself to have just one to-do list
Oh,
and by
whoa. That's massive.
yeah, and for the first time in 3 years again, I've got down to inbox zero, at least for a few minutes until the emails stop popping up again. So just that one change was a game changer for me. And then using AI. So Google has this tool called Notebook LLM, and
Hmm.
I've been able to speed read for the first time in my life. Not because I can speed read. People assume I'm a fast reader. I'm a very slow reader
I would
because
assume
I
so
cover
too.
so
Yes.
yeah, you and I, we like to go deep, right? We really like to absorb the information that way. Um, but things like Notebook LLM have really helped me to start absorbing a lot more information just by their summarize and create a podcast sort of function. So I'm really excited about the state of learning. And that's another huge opportunity, I believe, for organizations, not just their internal AI transformations with big tech, and because a lot of people are still working on those case studies.
Oh,
But
yes.
just in terms of upskilling the workforce and freeing them up to learn a lot more quickly and broadly, I believe is going to give us a whole different kind of knowledge worker this and next year.
An enhanced human. Yeah, totally. Any final parting thoughts? Anything that you didn't get to address or I didn't get to ask you? And anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Really appreciate your thoughtful questions, Nadia. And you have my book, of course, already,
Yes.
Business storytelling from hype to hack. It's written for busy people like you and like our colleagues who maybe only have time to read 100 pages on a plane, on holiday somewhere. So it was really written to be practical, to help people put storytelling into practice on day one and not have to spend 10,000 hours acquiring a new skill, but really taking that essential human communication, which is storytelling. We've all already heard hundreds, thousands of stories, movies, we've read books. So we all have a basic understanding of stories. But what my work does, for example, in that book, Storytelling from Hype to Hack, is it really helps people transfer that knowledge and start using it in their day-to-day operations.
Thank you so much for your book. Yes, it is an easy, fast read, and the book is not too big that it takes too much space on a suitcase. So thank you so much. Those are all my questions. Thank you so much, Jyoti Guptara. This has been great.
Thanks so much, Nadia. Really enjoyed chatting with you.